Welcome to Empowering Seniors. I'm your host, Katherine Ambrose. Today we're going to talk about how to communicate better with your loved ones and the people in your life. Today I have author Mark Olsey, who's written The Pledge of a Lifetime. He's a marriage counselor, and he's come up with a wonderful acronym to remind us how better to communicate. Welcome, Mark, to the show.
Thank you, Katherine. I'm honored and excited to be here. Thank you.
We are glad to have you because I know this is going to be helpful for a lot of people, and I love the acronym. And so what inspired you to write the book?
So I've been a marriage counselor for 35 years, and over again, as I watch couples come in, they tell me they can't communicate, and then I watch them and they can't. But I consistently would see steps that they would take that would derail the conversation. And over time, I just developed an understanding of what it really takes to bring about a good, healthy, and helpful conversation.
So what did you learn through all your years of marriage counseling when the communication breaks down?
One of the things I learned that I would think was most significant to my work is that there actually is a sequence of steps to take. In fact, you mentioned pledge is an acronym. It's an acronym of 6 steps, a sequence of 6 steps to take that when you do, it enhances all your communication and it actually brings about the resolution of conflict. And what I saw was that people aren't following the steps, and yet when I teach it, they have one aha moment after another because they know it to be correct when I talk about it.
I think sometimes when people are really having conflict, they think they should just be able to communicate, just say what they want. You know, he had me worked up, so I just told him this. And things can really get to the point where it almost seems unrepairable. And I'm not talking about just marriages, but seniors that are estranged from children, or there's just a lot of conflict in the family, conflict between siblings. And reading this book, I thought, well, this is something that could really help empower seniors and empower families as a whole. So can you tell us a little bit about why it's important to be thoughtful and in communication?
I think that's actually, you've kind of said it there, the need to be thoughtful. We all want people to be thoughtful for us, right? We don't want people just to kind of spout out whatever's going on inside of them. I mean, that's scary and that can be hurtful. So we want that from them. So in the same way, I think we need to be considering them, thoughtful of them, honoring them, loving them. And so that I talk about in the book that this is a way, pledge is a way that governs what we speak, and it governs us with the idea of love as the underlying directive or motive.
That's really good. I think that's so important because if you're keeping that in mind, things are going to go better. Because if you just say everything you think, it could come across really terrible and you can't take those words back, really.
Right.
Even if you apologize.
Sure.
Some things just stick in your memory for decades. And with seniors, what happens sometimes, a lot of things arise in the aging process and everything gets stirred up again. Siblings are back in their sibling order no matter what type of professions they had. And you just have the dynamics of the children and the parents and the siblings. And I think Pledge can help. So could you tell us about that acronym?
Sure. I'd love to do that. Again, 6 steps. And I talk about the idea of using them, especially when in conflict, but in reality, we can use them in every single conversation we have. But let me talk about it first in the context of a conflict. If you and I were in a conflict right now, or let's say 10 minutes ago we had a conflict, okay? We were going to talk that through, and we started to do so, but one of us recognized, this is not going well. I'm being reactive. I just said something that I felt bad, or I could see it really hurt. The first step we need to do is just pause. Somebody say, hey, can we just take a break a minute? Let's just stop a moment. This is not helpful, and we need to dial down our emotions. So we pause to dial down our emotions and to remind ourselves of who this person is. This is my wife, this is my child, this is my dad, this is my mom. I need to remember that because I love my dad, I love my mom, and I want to honor them.
So when you feel yourself getting a little too heated, bring it down and pause.
Right.
All right. And what is the L?
L stands for listen. Because here's the deal. Again, if my dad and I were in a conflict, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, right? There's a story about what went down in the conflict. And the story in his head is different than the story in mind, in my mind. So I need to be willing, if I'm going to honor him and love him, I need to be willing to say, okay, Dad, your story is different than mine. I'm going to volunteer to listen first. And why don't you tell me what your story is? And I need to listen to understand him and what was going on in his mind that brought about the conflict.
You know, those are really good scripts. Let's just call them scripts for a second.
Okay.
Those two sentences that you used makes it more natural. This is, I think it's setting the stage. So I think that was brilliant.
When you say the two sentences.
Well, you said, I'm going to volunteer
Okay.
to listen to you first.
Okay, yes.
And so can you kind of repeat that? It might not be the same words, but the thought that when you're explaining how you're going to do that.
I think it's the idea, even behind it, of what does love look like? Okay, I can demand that you're going to hear me first.
Right. That doesn't feel good.
Doesn't feel good, doesn't feel loving. It creates greater reactivity. To love and honor someone, in my mind, it is to say, I'll listen first. Tell me what's going on. What happened? Why are you angry or hurt? And I'm going to listen. And I'm going to listen to understand you. Because here's the issue. Most of us, when we set out to listen, we are listening, but we listen for the wrong thing. What we do is, if you and I were in a conflict again, Katherine, and I say I'm going to listen first, what we tend to do is listen for all the things where you're wrong. That's not correct. That's not true. I didn't say it that way. I didn't do that either.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you're done, then I point out all the things you've said wrong, and I think I've listened well.
Right.
It's like we deceive ourselves. We're thinking, I did listen.
Right. But it's really just an argument. It's like, first of all,
Yes.
and start listing it off.
And the argument starts or continues because I listened for the wrong thing. I need to listen to your heart, I was going to say, or to what it is you want me to hear.
Well, and I think if you can start to understand the other side, it makes it so much easier. It really diffuses
Absolutely.
it so well.
That's something we all want. We want to be understood.
So pause, listen. What's step 3?
Echo.
Okay.
Once I've listened back or listened to you, I can say, I got it. I understand what you're saying. And you're sitting there thinking,
I don't know if you did understand.
that's exactly right. And on some level, there's no way to know for sure, unless on some level, I echo back
Okay.
and say, I think this is what you're saying. Let me echo back. So I do that. I echo back what it is I think you're saying. And then it gives me a chance to hear from you because you then say either, that's not quite it, in which case I go back and say, what did I miss? Tell me more. And I go back into the listening mode again.
Brilliant. Further diffusing it because then I hear, or then I'm heard.
Yes.
I feel heard.
Yeah. And I think you begin to feel like I really care.
Right.
Like you really matter in what you have to say.
Absolutely.
It really matters.
Okay. So pause, listen, echo, and the next step.
Disarm by validating.
Okay.
Again, this is especially when we're in conflict. If we're in just a normal conversation, we can still pause so we don't interrupt each other, right? Because a lot of people interrupt each other when we're in conversation. So we pause to not interrupt, we listen, we echo back still. And in a normal conversation, I would just say, just kind of still be validating of what the other person has said, like, thank you for sharing. That was helpful. I really appreciate you sharing that. Those are validating kind of statements, right?
Right.
But in a conflict, not only do you want to know that I really listened, so my echoing helps that back, but then I disarm the tension between us by validating, by saying, Katherine, that makes sense. I can see what you're saying. I appreciate that. It's a different story than what I have, but I now understand how you got that story. You're not crazy. that makes sense.
Okay.
Because most of us wonder, you know, we have a side we want to share, and part of us thinks, am I crazy for thinking this? And I want to indicate, no, what you said makes sense.
Okay. And then where do you go from there?
There. So the last two steps are give and engage.
Okay.
So one of the questions often comes up when I teach this is, okay, so Mark, you listen, you echo, you validate the other person and disarm the tension, but what about when you want to say something, or if you want to say your perspective on what happened? Well, first of all, I say sometimes. I don't always have to do that. But if I want to.
And that seems very mature, too.
And I think it's actually still in line with love. Because if I say, okay, now my turn, let me tell you what I'm saying, that's not really in line with love or honoring or respecting, that's demanding. But if I listen well to you, and I echo back and disarm the tension between us by validating, Katherine, you're going to feel like, wow, this is amazing. I think Mark really cares. I think what I had to say really matters. And almost naturally, you're gonna move us to the next step, which is give, G for give. Okay. And almost naturally, you're gonna say, Mark, can you give me your side, your thoughts? I wanna hear you now, like I was listened to by you. So that's the next step. So then I would give my perspective on what happened.
Okay.
And at that point, we kind of also take the last step of engage and use that as well, because things turn around now and you begin to engage the same process. You now listen to me to understand what I have to say, echo back, and validate my perspective as well. And in so doing, we engage the process around and around to better the communication and bring resolve.
This sounds like such a great thing to learn even as a family or for young children. Make life a lot easier to understand when we're being demanding or when we're not responding to people in a loving way. I just think that using the system is, I can see why it just made sense to you, and thank you for putting it down and making it so easy for people to understand.
Welcome.
So
I really care about people and their relationships, so I'm thankful for the opportunity to share this and even see that.
So are you perfect? Do you always use pledge?
I don't.
Okay, so
fact,
where have you messed this up?
I was just going to tell you a story. I had a story with my own parents, right? Okay, and I didn't do well at all. But let me tell you a story real quick. So my parents are in their late 80s, and you know, they're here in Wichita. I love my parents. I've always known that I've been loved by them, and I love them. But we're getting to that place where we're trying to figure out how are we going to continue in this part of their season of life. And I've been talking with them about taking the next step to move into assisted living. So one day, it's actually been a few months now, we went over to their house, I did and my sister, and we talked with them about the idea of moving into assisted living. Even talked about some places that we had seen and so forth. And my dad was like, no, we're not ready. And I said, Dad, let me tell you a little bit more. I think you need to do this because of this and this and this. We're not ready. I said, Dad, you're not listening to me. You need to do this because I'm concerned about you and so forth. And things were ramping up. And he said, I'm not ready. We do not want to go. Dad, I'm really thinking you need to. We are not ready. And I said, Dad, I'm in 100% disagreement with you. And he said, I'm in 100% disagreement with you. And I was like, just everything just came to an ending right there. I realized a couple things really quickly. I was not doing what I teach people to do. And my frustration was so high, and there's some PET scans that say that when your emotions are real high, the rational part of your brain shuts down. So you literally can't communicate well. And we failed in that way. Neither of us communicated well. So I just said, okay, let's stop. And then Mom, in her loving kindness, she said, let's eat something.
Disarming.
She was disarming as well. And it just kind of gave us space. It put us, in a sense, into a time of pause. For that time to dial down our emotions and remember who we are. So we ate. said a few things after dinner, not much during dinner, and said goodbye. And I'm having to tell you, Katherine, I was on pause for 3 days. And that whole time, I'm wrestling with my emotions, my frustration. And as that's dialing down, I'm also wrestling with the reality. I didn't love my dad well. I didn't honor him well in the way that I was communicating. So 3 days later, I went and said, Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't do what I teach people to do. And I wasn't very loving to you. I'm sorry. And I said, Dad, I'd like to listen, really listen to your thoughts, your concerns, why it is you're not ready to go into assisted living. And I sat back and I listened. And it was wonderful. He began sharing different concerns and thoughts and reasons why. And I was no longer reactive because I was using pledge, and my heart was there to do that. I'm pointing out my book down there. My heart was there to do that.
Right.
And I was echoing back and validating every one of his concerns. And it just drew us closer together, and it reconnected us. And I know he felt loved, and I felt it as well.
These are tough decisions. We talk about these kind of decisions all the time on our program and at our seminars and everything that we do.
Yeah.
It's really tough. It's very loaded because sometimes the children feel like they have the answer, they know what needs to be done, and they want parents to comply, and the parents aren't ready. And the more the child pushes, the more the parents are going to push back.
Yes.
And so we all want to be in charge of our own life and have the right to do that. And unless there comes to a point where something just has to be done.
Yeah.
But you do want to keep that conversation going so that they can come to their own conclusion the best way possible, so they don't feel like they've been ordered and told what to do. Because then when they move into assisted living, they're probably going to be unhappy because somebody made them do it. The kids did this to us. That causes extreme conflict. So I'm glad that we have the opportunity to talk about this related to empowering seniors and empowering families in these sensitive, complex aging issues.
And they are sensitive and complex. They really are. Here's one little extra cool thing about the story. Because I did that with my dad, our relationship got better and better over the next few months. And interestingly enough, my dad has now come to me saying he's thinking more about it.
Perfect.
And a bit more open to it. And so he's now bringing up the conversation rather than me demanding it. So it's been a beautiful thing to see.
That's good. And that's the ideal, that they get enough information, there's enough calm conversation that they come up with their own plan, what they want to do.
Yes.
So why did it feel so important to you that they consider that move? What was causing that stress?
Probably several things. One of them is just all these questions in my mind. What's going to happen? Every call I get is like, literally every call I get during the week from, and I see it's on my phone, my mom or my dad, I'm thinking like, are they okay? And I don't know if they're okay. And so there's that anxiety, and they have fallen, a couple times. And so that's a concern. And my thought is, if they're in a place, then I'm not quite so concerned about them. I know they're going to have care and concern when they need it. We'll still be there. But if I can't be there right away, they'll have someone there who needs help.
Because you'll still be there to get the call, but in the meantime, someone else can be helping.
Yes.
And they'll have other people around. Plus, do you worry about isolation, that maybe they are cut off in a lot of ways and having struggles, and you see answers for them?
So that's one of the interesting things as well. My parents have always been quite social. I grew up always having people in our home. And my wife and I do the same now, but it was modeled to us. So even today, this is really crazy, but they, even today, in their late 80s, and my mom, well, I won't say how old my mom is exactly. She may not like that when she sees this, but they still host people on Monday nights They have people from their church come over, usually a couple of different couples. So they're still very social. And my thought is, if they were in a place, assisted living, they'd have more people to connect with and so forth. So that's part of the thought as well.
Well, and they could still have their friends come.
Sure.
Because independent living, assisted living, they have rooms that you can use so you can still host your events. But that's good because so many seniors have isolated themselves, and that's when it gets really scary. But it's really the pressure that the adult children are feeling. It's just worry and stress. And so how does that affect your career, your marriage, other things going on? Does that impact you when you're worried or when you're like a primary caregiver?
Well, it causes us both stress at various levels for sure, and worry and so forth, and it becomes a conversation topic that my wife and I have a lot. It's a real concern for both. I'm grateful for my wife. She's a wonderful, beautiful woman, the best friend of my life. And she is very caring for my parents and very patient in all this process too. So I'm very thankful for her. It's very helpful.
But it impacts everyone involved.
It does.
So you did a great job of illustrating that. And so you talk about Pledge, you teach Pledge because there's actually a huge skill set to really learn it. We covered it, it makes sense. So Mark, what is your aspiration with Pledge Talk?
Oh, thank you. It's a great question. Really my greatest dream is and would be for an entire organization, a business, a church, to understand the need for communication. We all know that, but we don't really do what it takes to really get well at it. But what if an entire organization, a business, what if an entire church said, we're going to learn Pledge and the steps, and and the language, and we're all going to make it as a part of our organization, a part of our church, part of our small group, as we've done with our family. All of my kids, and we've got several additional ones, we all know Pledge and use it in conversation, and it enhances all of our communication, every one of our conversations, and whenever we're in conflict. What if that were the case with an entire business? Everybody knows it. They know the language. So they're all using it in conversations, in board meetings, in staff meetings, and committee meetings in the church, they're using it. And when they have conflict, which they do, they all default back immediately to the concepts because they understand the importance of them. And they have hope and belief that by doing that, they'll be able to find resolve.
I think it's a great thing to establish as a standard. This is how we communicate, becomes part of the culture. But what really touches me about that is that my husband and I, in different business trainings and cultures that we've been part of, we did take those lessons home and we taught our children certain things from young ages. For example, instead of saying no problem, to say my pleasure or absolutely, something positive. So if no problem comes out of my mouth, my adult children will their jaws will drop because that was just language that they were taught not to use.
Yes.
So I think that teaching people how to communicate in such easy steps that they can go home and teach to their kids, brilliant.
When our kids were small, they would come to us and say, so-and-so did this and whatever. We didn't like the tattletelling, so we created a little way for them to intersect with us and deal with the problem. So we said, if you guys have a problem, come to us and say, Mom, Dad, we have a problem. And then we said, okay, great, let's sit down. And we guided them through the conversation to bring healing to the relationship. Very
cool.
Yep.
Very good. Well, thank you for sharing this with us. I think it was an important topic, and it's designed to empower. So thank you very much, Mark, for being on the show.
Katherine, thank you. I'm really grateful for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
If you have more questions about this topic or anything that we cover, you can reach out directly to the station by calling 316-686-4500 or email us at empoweringseniors@kpts.org. Until next time, I'm Katherine Ambrose with Empowering Seniors.